Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Tuesday, January 7, 2020. And here are our top stories. Tax prep companies can no longer hide their free filing services. And how do you compare cellular and wireless carriers? Let's welcome in Dan Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter. Happy New Year, Dan.
Happy New Year, Jeff.
Good to see you. And I know that you are on the road soon to travel to the Consumer Electronics Show for 2020. We covered that, I think, last week. But it's tax season, and that means people going online and looking to do their tax returns. What do you have to say about this?
So it's the very early part of tax season, and I would say that most people do not have their W-2s, their 1099s, their other forms. I'd say it's more common to start putting that together in late January. But some news came out that the government has actually made it easier, and it's rare to think of the government doing something that's pro-consumer. They've made it easier to find when tax companies, tax prep software have free options. In all cases, there is some free option, but what companies have done, and I won't blame any specific one because it's been a widespread practice, is they haven't exactly been front and center with the free option. Now, they are no longer allowed to do anything that makes it hard for their free options to show up when you do a basic search on Google or other places. So most people cannot use a free option. You have to have a very basic tax return. Frankly, even if you do, it's worth paying the under $200 it will cost you to have the full audit check and audit defense and some of the other things you can get through the tax prep companies. But if you're young, if you have a very simple return and you want to file for free and use an electronic tax preparing service, you can do that, and now it will be easier to find.
Absolutely. And I think, just my experience. So when I was a single person, I had a very simple, and I ran, so I had a very simple tax return. And I would go online to use Intuit's Quicken or some other proprietary software. And you would go in, fill things out. It would actually pull my W-2 and information from my employer or my employers into the system, figure out if I was working in New York, New Jersey. And then when I got to, and let me file the Fed for free. But when I got to the state, that's where I had to pay. I think it's a good thing for people to be able to find these links. And I think it actually benefits the software companies because it's like, okay, our information's out there and you don't have to dig around to find it. And maybe you get more services, provide more services for customers that way.
Yeah, and it makes sense. So I've used the same company year after year, and my taxes have gotten progressively more complicated as I am a contract worker who works for largely one company, but also has significant other business interests that feed into my picture. I have some contractors that I pay. I have some short-term people that maybe build something for me digitally and then go away. I rent office space. I use part of my home as a home office, but a very fractional piece. A lot of my travel is taxable or deduction on my taxes. A small piece of my Disney membership or annual pass, because while I'm not going to pretend that 90% of what I do at Disney is business, 25% of it is and informs articles. So my tax piece is very complicated. And then I moved to Florida where it actually got a little easier because we don't have a state income tax. So that's one less thing to worry about. But when my taxes were pretty simple, I used the same company. So now all of my historical data is there. We got identity thefted a few years ago, and it made it a lot easier in proving who I was to have all of the numbers from previous years at very easy disposal without having to get copies sent to me. It made filing the pre-report and refiling your taxes so they basically said, oh, these are the right ones, not this person who filed trying to get a refund and sort of stealing money. It's a lot easier. So even if you're very young and you could just do it in the back of an envelope, you really should do it electronically. It will prevent mistakes and it will make it easier for you going forward.
I agree. I think it's good. Even if you use a professional, it's a great way to validate what the professional is doing. Not that they're going to do anything wrong, but you've got to have a secondary check. And this is their busy season. Typically, April 15th is when most Americans file, although you can delay till October. Dan, let me ask you about this. We have been covering data, cybersecurity, data breaches, privacy. This is really the time of year where people need to be aware of fraudulent behavior, especially the elderly people who, the IRS is not calling people up and saying, give me your social security number, right?
Yeah. And look, legitimate people you owe money to never ask you to pay an iTunes gift cards or Starbucks gift cards or anything else. The reality is, if you get a customer service call that doesn't seem 1,000% above board, you should hang up, find the actual customer service number for that company, and call them and see if they have questions on your account. You'll get emails that will look like they're from your electricity company or your cable provider or whoever, and be aware that none of these companies will ever ask you for your account info in response to an email. Even generally, they will have a proper method of contacting you. They will not send you a, hey, could you please call me email. So be very skeptical and go online and find the right number, or look at your bill and find the right number and initiate. And what's the worst that happens? You call up and they say, no, we actually weren't looking for you. And you could say, okay, well, thank you, Verizon or Florida Public Power and Lighting or whoever it is, and just move on with your day. Be careful and be suspicious.
Dan, this is from out of right field or left field, depending on where you're sitting in the stadium. We have talked about data breaches with Equifax, where Social Security information is wound up online. Do you ever anticipate a time where we don't use that? So we use a different field as a key indicator of who we are. I mean, are we at the point? I know we've talked about biometrics. We've talked about looking at the pupil and facial recognition, but do we ever get to a point where we don't use that Social Security number, that it just becomes antiquated, regardless of two-factor authentication and other protocols?
So when you say ever, I'll say yes.
Okay.
But the vast majority of government websites, which look like they were built in 1984 and probably were.
They probably were with COBOL.
Yeah, the government moves very, very slowly. Even, I pay my water bill at our Orlando house via a town interface, and it's super duper clunky, and like I could build something better myself pretty much. So yes, do I expect we'll go to facial recognition or eyeballs or DNA or who knows what? Yeah, 40 years from now. Do I think we'll have good government websites that can give us access to our information? Yeah, maybe in 10, 20 years. I expect the private world to move a lot faster on this than the government world.
Yeah, well, good information all around, Dan. The audience should, we're going to do more coverage on taxation and taxes and submitting those taxes as the year progresses. Dan, I want to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dan about an audience question that we got around cell carriers. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back, everyone. And we're talking to Daniel Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Dan, thanks for sticking around this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And I know you are chomping at the bit to get to CES, but we've got a viewer question. This comes from Helen from Baltimore, asking us about cell carriers and some of the differences between, say, a Verizon and a T-Mobile. Are there differences between carriers? What can you tell us there? I know this is an area that you really cover and have covered for many years with TMF and others, The Motley Fool and other periodicals.
So Verizon and AT&T will market the idea that they have absolutely superior networks. And there was a point where that was true, but largely for most people, those days are well in the past. So you really have to look at T-Mobile and Sprint a little bit separately. The two companies are trying to merge, but T-Mobile is a healthy, growing company. Sprint is a slowly dying company that maybe doesn't have the cash to keep up to date. So Sprint runs commercials that says, hey, our network's not quite as good, but it's good enough. And for the most part, they're right. I have T-Mobile, but previously had Sprint. And T-Mobile is near equal to Verizon and AT&T. Sprint is a tiny bit inferior. That doesn't mean you will have an equal experience with all of them. My family has a home in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Jaffrey, New Hampshire is 1 bar for Sprint, 0 reception for T-Mobile. Now, it doesn't matter because if I'm there, I'm usually in the house and T-Mobile offers free Wi-Fi calling and the actual town center has free Wi-Fi. So in the places I'll be, I'm generally covered, but there is completely 0 cell phone reception for my carrier. I might find that Verizon had great coverage there, but maybe had a hole someplace. You know, when you look at those maps of coverage, they're not fully colored in. So there are towns or places, or I was in the mountains of North Carolina and my reception went depending on where I was. And so did my satellite radio in my rental car. So you have to look at what's best for you. And one of the ways to do that is just ask people who go to the same places that you do. People who live in your town, travel to the same sorts of things. What is their reception like and what is their carrier? Because you might find someone say, geesh, I have Sprint, it's the cheapest and I love it and it works great. And that might be perfect for you.
Dan, let me ask you this. I mean, let's get to the granular. Are there actually cell towers out there? There's a cell tower out there for Verizon, one for T-Mobile, one for Sprint, one for AT&T. Are they all next to each other or do they just use the same, do they rent or lease those towers to connect? Out of curiosity.
So I'm pretty sure that can vary, but they're using different airwaves, essentially, different broadcast spectrum. And some of that depends on what phone you're using. So if you're using the latest iPhone, for years, T-Mobile has been optimized to make different types of connections. So they'll have a better network on a new iPhone. There are other phones that use that technology, but that's a question you can ask the provider. Is there a best phone for your network? Or if you're interested in 5G, 5G is the next generation of phone internet connectivity, which is going to improve watching video, maybe replace your traditional internet connection. Well, you might want to ask, when is 5G coming to my area? The carrier may not know that answer. And if it's coming or it already exists, what phone could I buy? And there's only a couple that will take advantage of this. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it does make sense to go talk to someone.
Yeah, so you can go to the store, you can make a phone call. I would imagine there are forums online like Reddits and subreddits that probably deal with this. They can go to the Motley Fool, I'm sure, among other websites. People will probably talk about this. And now's the right time, Dan, to take a look at not only your retirement and your savings, right? But as you talked about on the last show, budget. Part of the budget is what you spend for your cell phone. You spend, and maybe there are ways to reduce that. Now's the time to do that.
And so we've talked about this before. There's really two components to your cell phone bill. There's your phone calls and data. And it used to be that phone calls cost money and had a limit, but generally everybody gets unlimited calls and texts. And in most cases, you're getting unlimited data, though there might be a cap where it slows down. So that's one piece of your bill. Maybe it's $65 per line on Verizon. I'm guessing it's a moving target. Maybe that's what it costs right now. The second piece is you need a phone that's compatible on that network. And it used to be that the phone carrier would sign you to a contract and give you the phone, but you'd, of course, just be paying the price of that phone in the cost of your service. Now, you have the option of bringing your own phone, if it's a phone that works on that network, and you might need to buy a $15 SIM card, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to do. Or the more traditional route is you go to the carrier, and the carrier offers you either a promotional deal on a new phone, which usually involves trading in a relatively new phone that you can show you clearly own. So it's not really free. Or what probably most people do is they finance a phone over 2 years. That can be a very significant amount of money if you're putting 2 or 3 new iPhones on and you're paying for each one over monthly installments. Or it can be very inexpensive if you opt for lower-end Android phones or have a phone that's already compatible. So 2 big pieces of your bill, and what you want to look at is what is my monthly cost, and except for T-Mobile, there's also going to be taxes and fees. T-Mobile rolls that into the advertised cost. And then look at what is my phone going to cost me, and are there ways around that? And sometimes then you have to compare promotions. Well, okay, T-Mobile, their price is cheaper, but their deal on the phone I want isn't as good. There can be a lot of variance to this, and it is the kind of thing where, yes, this is probably the best time of year, or maybe we're just past the best time of year to make a deal. On the other hand, a company has a weak quarter and they run a great promotion. There are promotions run all year in the cell phone space.
Dan, last question. We've got about a minute left. What about prepaid cell phones? What's your take on that? That seems to be a big trend too these days.
So prepaid cell phones will generally cost you less, but in most cases you'll get less. So if you're not someone who uses your phone heavily, or you're even someone who just wants a flip phone, then these might be the cheapest option for you. But if you're a heavy data user, in general, prepaid plans have data limits. Maybe you're paying for 1 gig or 5 gig or 10 gigs. And after you go over that, it either slows down a lot or you have the option to buy more. That's not a great plan for you. So for older folks that don't use their phones as heavily, or frankly, younger folks who don't use their phones as heavily, yes, prepaid can be cheaper, but it is generally an inferior product.
Yeah, great analysis, Dan. Thanks to Helen for submitting the question. And don't forget, you can submit questions as well. I tell you how to do that at the end of the show. Dan, enjoy the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada. Always enjoy talking to you. And we'll see you later in the week for the podcast. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll see you soon.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found it helpful, enjoyable. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should interview? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired of the same